David Sebastian, A Frog's Story. The story of a special frog who finds out just what it takes to be fully human. Once upon a time, there was a little green stuffed frog. He spent his first years in a third grade classroom inside of a pretty church. His very first memory was of looking at an enormous antique stained glass window. It was lovely. He spent each day listening as a teacher read to the children. He heard many stories about God. The stories were from a book called the Holy Bible. He learned about how God created the whole world, all the plants and animals, and the first two people called Adam and Eve. He learned that people can pray or talk to God and ask Him for help and praise Him for their lives. He never heard any stories about stuffed frogs. He wondered if God had created him too, or if there was another story about how he came into being. The children often cuddled him or tossed him into the air. This made him very happy. So even though he had many, many questions about life, he was a happy stuffed frog. One wintry Sunday, the teacher decided that her classroom was getting far too cluttered with toys. The teacher asked the little boys and girls to sort through the stuffed animals and to take home any that belonged to them. After a few days, most of the stuffed animals had been claimed. No one took the little green frog home, though, but that was okay for him, since he could not remember who he belonged to anyway. Finally, the teacher decided that she would donate the rest of the toys to a second-hand store. Once he got to the store, the little green frog really liked being on the metal shelf with the other stuffed animals. They didn't say much, but they were soft and fluffy and smiley. There was a big yellow duck, a blue and white checkered elephant, a tiny gray raccoon with no tail, a pink bear with a strawberry on its tummy, a purple bear, a brown bear with a stuffed bag that said sugar on it. The little green frog thought that he would stay at the second-hand store forever. One day, a tired old hag came into the second-hand store looking for a new frog to add to her collection. She had once been a beautiful young lady. However, her heart had been broken so many times that she had given up on all fashion and grooming. She was a little puffy around the arms, rear, and belly. She had dry, bleached blonde hair, a slight double chin, and a nose that was shaped like a long light bulb. There were large coffee and mustard stains all over her purple sweatshirt. She wore comfortable mom jeans, and this was not when mom jeans were in style. And she wore tennis shoes with Velcro closures. Her wristwatch had a calculator on it, which was also not in style. David really hoped that she would not buy him, since he could sense her loneliness and desperation. But David, in his cute green fuzziness, was just the thing she had been looking for that day. So the hag whisked him up to the cashier and promptly bought him. The froggy was taken to the old hag's house. She lived in a two-bedroom apartment. Even though it was small, it was neat, tidy, and cozy. The hag placed the frog on her bed, where she had a tremendous collection of stuffed frogs. She explained to the newest froggy that she had always liked the story of the princess who had turned a frog into a prince by kissing him. She understood, thank goodness, that it was silly to kiss stuffed frogs, so she seldom ever kissed her frogs. She did, however, give all of her frogs names that she felt would be fitting for a handsome prince. For her newest addition, she chose the name David Sebastian. Every day, when the old hag went to work, sweet David would sneak out into the courtyard and gaze at nature. He would squeeze his head through the bars of an iron fence surrounding a frozen pond and just gaze and gaze at the ducks who lived there. Sometimes he would shimmy up to the top of the fence and perch there all day long. Often he climbed into the fragrant bough of a pine tree and just thought and thought about many, many things. And then he would sigh, a big sigh. After about a week of this, David decided that he wanted to go out into the world and see more of what was out there. So he asked the old hag if he could leave. "Well," she said, "you really ought to have a challenge first." "A challenge?" asked David in a puzzled voice. "You really ought to fight my dragon, conquer it, and be awarded its treasure for your valor." "You have a dragon, really?" David was simply amazed. "Well, duh, yeah, of course I do," retorted the hag. Yeah, that sounds, well, but I'm not mad at your dragon, stammered poor David. Of course you aren't mad at him, but David, you want to see the world, don't you? I can't believe it. You have a dragon. David was still too shocked to think straight. Bring on the dragon! Cried the hag with jubilant glee. It turns out that the dragon was of the shiny green variety, who loved a good wrestling match. Sparkling in the back of the dragon's cave, David could see the jewels, and he wondered if it would all be worth it. And yet, he fought that rascally dragon. It was a fierce battle. In the end, David won the treasure. David was dripping in jewels. He thought that he was one rich frog. Little did he know, though, that you cannot buy anything with jewels nowadays, so he took it to a pawn shop. The pawn shop did not offer him enough money for his treasure. David was pretty certain he could get more if he sold it privately, so he took out an ad in the Thrifty Nickel. Soon the calls started to pour in. Before long David had sold all of his treasure for cold hard cash, and he had lots of money. Then David had a terrible dream. David realized that once you have lots of money, then all you do is worry about not having it anymore. So he decided that if he were to head to Mexico, that he could make his money last a lot longer down there. He packed all of his money into a little bag and he took off on foot. It was a long, long journey, but finally he was at the border. When David finally got to Mexico, he was starving. He blew a lot of money going out to eat. He ate out every single day. Soon David made a new amigo, whose name was Pedro. Pedro was a nice hombre, but he didn't understand a word David said to him. David was sort of a bad influence on Pedro, and Pedro was definitely a bad influence on David. He encouraged David to blow through his money. David spent it on mariachi bands, piñatas, jumping beans, flamenco dancers, a feline and an automobile, who were both called jaguars, margaritas, tostadas, enchiladas, glitzy sombreros, fajitas, a fancy hacienda, and a pet parrot in a gilded cage. The parrot was known far and wide as the famous fighter named El Gordo Pollo. David partied hard, which left him no quiet time to just sit and think. Poor David. All this crazy bird wanted to do was fight and bite and be downright mean and nasty. During the months that David partied and whooped it up in Mexico, he was having a fantastic time. He became fat and sassy. It seemed that everywhere he went he was adored. He never just sat in a tree and thought about things now. He could care less about where he came from or who made him. He just wanted to have a good time, and he sure did, for a while. It seemed like a wild dream that could last forever. One day, though, his money finally ran out. It seemed to happen so suddenly. It was all gone. Poof! Just like that. Even Pedro, his buddy, was long gone. David became hungry. Eventually, he grew so desperate that he was even forced to dumpster dive behind a restaurant for some old cabbage to eat. He remembered the story of the prodigal son in the Bible. He remembered how the lad in the story had hit rock bottom, too. In the story, the boy had decided to ask his father to take him back in. David became dismayed when he realized that he had no one to call. He had no father or mother. What a bleak day it was for David. Yet somehow he managed to stumble across a single dollar bill lying in the street. With joy and relief, he formulated a plan. He would trade the dollar in for just enough pesos to place a single phone call. He called the hag. She was surprised to hear from David, yet she gladly wired him some money for a Greyhound bus ticket. He never even had to buy the ticket, though, since in the end he had a kindly passenger agree to smuggle him on in their handbag. After all, he was just a stuffed frog. That trip home to Boise was cramped, hot, smelly, and terribly uncomfortable. Back home, though, he was finally. Now remember, where your treasure is, there is your heart. Therefore, store up your treasure in heaven." Then he gladly earned an honest living as a cart-getter-backer and stacker-upper at a local supermarket. David worked hard, for he still recalled that not so long ago he had eaten from a dumpster. David Sebastian became the most industrious stuffed frog you could ever hope to meet. He saved his money, spending it on nothing but healthy things to eat with an occasional treat. Soon he had enough that he was able to invest in a local business. He bought a barbershop from Clyde. David had learned that it takes more than money to make a frog happy. However, he still had a lot of questions about where he came from and what his purpose was here on earth. He and the dear old hag had many conversations about these topics as they shared tears, laughter, and coffee. David also spent a lot of time trying to read his tag in order to figure out exactly what factory he had been made in. It was a difficult job, since his tag was in a very inconvenient spot. Finally, David was able to make out the words, "Made in China." David knew one thing for sure. He was not going to run off to China just to see some old toy factory. He understood that all stuffed animals were made just to be loved by people until their stuff and fluff wore out. He was satisfied with that. He asked the darling old hag if she felt that she was fulfilling her purpose in life. She told David that her purpose in life was to get to know her Maker and to tell other people about him. She explained that if people came to know all about him, and if they loved and obeyed him, then they never had to wear out. She told David that people were not like stuffed frogs, because they could go on living with their loving Maker forever. She told David that all people shared a Maker named Jesus. She told him that deep down inside, she knew her purpose in life was to teach others about Jesus Christ. Then she admitted that she had not fulfilled her purpose, not even with one person. David told her that if he could live forever, he would be so excited that he would tell everyone. The precious hag explained that most people didn't want to hear the name of Jesus. She told him that people called her names, like hypocrite, when she spoke of her Maker. She told David that she was more concerned about pleasing other people than fulfilling her life's purpose. David told her that she would never be happy until she did what her Maker had made her to do. David was right. So she told just one person that day, and the next day she told someone else. Suddenly, the old hag didn't feel like an old hag anymore, and David was free to just sit in the trees and dream. And that's exactly what he did. The end.